Everything in my life worked. There was career progression, kids were fine. There was nothing that was falling apart. What made it so confusing for me? I don't think I burn out. And I want to say that very clearly because burnout, they have a shape. There is a moment that you could point and say that was the point that I've burned out. It has a breaking point, a moment exactly that you could point to. But that was not what happened to me. What happened was a lot quieter than that. And I guess in some way it was a lot harder to explain because everything in my life worked. There was career progression, kids were fine, relationships, they were intact. There was nothing specifically that broke. There was nothing that was falling apart. And I guess that was exactly what made it so confusing for me. Because when something breaks, you know what to fix. But when everything is technically fine and you still feel love, there was really nothing to point to. There was no story, there was no reason, there was no explanation that could validate. And I guess that was exactly what made it so confusing. Because when something breaks, you know what to fix. But when everything is technically fine and yet you still feel love, there is nothing to point to. There was no story, there was no reason, there was no explanation that could sound valid when you say it out loud. There is just this very low, constant feeling that something is not quite right. And I kept dismissing it because I kept looking at my life and I kept thinking to myself, what is there to complain about? Ultimately, I think it is its own kind of trap. Because the moment you start to measure your own feelings against what you feel like you're expected to think, against what you think you're allowed to feel, and you stop listening to them entirely. Just let me explain what I think the life looks like. And I think a lot of women can attest to this being how they feel. Because I think a lot of women will recognize this exact setup. You wake up and then you have this routine, and this routine works. You know exactly what you're doing today. You know what you're doing tomorrow. You know what you're doing next week. There are people who need you, and you show up consistently, reliably. Well, at work, you're competent. Perhaps you're more than competent. And you've been doing this long enough that the difficult things no longer feel difficult for you. And I guess that should have felt like a win, which it does. Mostly, I guess. And at home, you're present, or at least a version of you, the version of present, the version that makes sure that things run, that nothing falls through the cracks, that everyone is being well taken care of. And if someone asked you, how are you feeling? You'll say, fine. And I guess you mean it most of the time. Mostly. So this is not a story about a woman in crisis. This is a story of a woman whose life works perfectly for someone she used to be. So I remember sitting in a meeting one time. I knew how to perform in a meeting. I knew exactly when to talk, when it's my turn to speak. What should I talk about? What should I ask? What should I challenge? I knew how to read a room, when to speak, when to ask questions, how to give the right impression. And I think ultimately I was doing all of that, but on autopilot. And in the middle of it all, I just had this revelation. It was nothing dramatic. It was not loud. It was just very quietly telling me, when did I get so good at performing this? Not doing it, but showing that I could do it. But anyway, I didn't stop the meeting. I just went on. I just filed it away as what I do usually. Or rather, the way you do it when you feel like you don't have the bandwidth to manage that part of emotions. But then it came back, in the shower, during traffic, or at 2 a.m. when you're just trying to finish your work. And you keep asking yourself, like, when did I get so good at performing this part of me? So I guess eventually I asked myself, right, performing what? What exactly? Was it a job? Or was it a role? Or was it this version of me that people expect? All of it. And here's the thing about losing yourself, it doesn't happen suddenly. Not all at once. There is no moment, there was no clean before and after. It just happens in very small steps. The hobby that you stop because you somehow got too tired to carry it on. Or the opinion that you just stop voicing because it's too tiring to continuously defend your position. It was simply easier not to voice it out. The version of you that was just a little bit louder, a little less polished, a little more you, a little more just you, I guess. She didn't leave. She just stopped getting scheduled into your life. And what fills the space? The role. The manager, the mother, the co-worker, the partner, the daughter, the reliable one, the capable one. These roles, they're real and they matter. But at some point, and mind you, nobody actually marks this exact moment. They take up most of the space. And everything that was you, that makes you, you, they started leaving in the smaller rooms. I mean, she's still there. She just hasn't had the chance to get sufficient airtime lately. And I guess this is the part that keeps many women stuck. The guilt. Because you know how it sounds. My life is good, but I feel off. I guess somewhere along the way, that kind of feeling makes you feel very ungrateful. So you don't say it anymore. You just say, I'm just a little bit tired. I just need a break. It's just a passing phase. I'm probably having PMS. You start to postpone it. You start to say later. Later when things calm down. Later when the kids are older. Later when there's just more time. But here's the thing, right? Things don't change shape. Things don't come down. They just change the form at which they appear in your life. And then later, they keeps moving. So I guess you adjust like you're wearing something that technically fits, but they actually don't. It was really just cut out for somebody else. It technically fits, but you just feel it on yourself the whole day. It's this quiet friction that's not quite painful, but it just feels a little bit off. And I see you. So I want to say something directly because I think there is a woman watching this video who is very, very good at her life. She's built something real. She's responsible, she's capable, and she will never call herself unhappy. And yet, in the quiet moments in life, she will feel this distance. It's not a crisis, it's just a gap. Small enough to ignore on a very, very busy day, but big enough to feel on a very quiet one. And I want you to hear this. This feeling that you're having, that's not ingratitude. It is not weakness, it's information. It's you knocking from the inside of the life that was built well, but maybe not fully built by you. And the question right now isn't how to fix it. Not yet. The question you should have for yourself is, when did you stop listening? I guess ultimately I still want to be very careful because the message here is not that I have figured it all out. Because I'm not going to tell you that I figured it out. I didn't leave my job to find myself. I left my job and I found questions. What do I actually like? Not what I'm good at. What do I actually like? What would I do if I wasn't trying to prove something? This sounds very simple, but they're not. Because when you've been performing long enough, all of a sudden you forget how it feels like to unperform. But I find her in very small moments. The morning that I woke up and just stayed, not having any alarm, but just rest. Sitting with my daughter and not being 3 steps ahead. And making a decision that wasn't right for this role, but just making a decision for me. Small things, but they feel like pieces of something that I didn't realize that I was losing. So I don't think most women are lost. But I do think that they are outdated in that they're still living a life that fits them, the them that they were a couple of years ago. Before the promotions, before life caught up, before the responsibilities, before they got so good at everything they do, at being everything to everyone, that it somehow felt like being something to themselves started being an optional choice. And I guess the hardest part is that nothing actually felt wrong enough for you to stop and change things. The life worked. Everyone is fine. There was simply no crisis. It's just a very quiet gap between who you are and who you actually are. And I guess sitting with that, not trying to fix it, and not dismissing it, just listening to it long enough to hear what it's actually trying to tell you, that is where it starts. And I'll see you next week. This is The Brave Life.